We're continuing on with our series, comparing the Toronto Blue Jays opening day roster to a possible Baltimore Orioles.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jays. Thank you for making Locked On Blue Jays your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. As always, I'm Braden Wasco. He's Carter First. You can find us on Twitter, Braden5E Wasco. Locked On Blue Jays. Just joking. At Carter First too, as well as Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Blue Jays. If you're new here to YouTube, or you're listening anywhere else, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It really does help us out. Carter just recorded the AL East preview, which is going to come out just before the season kicks off. So we'll talk a little bit about that right off the top, but we want to get into Orioles versus Blue Jays opening day rosters, all that. Also, Discord link is down in the description. Fantasy League is about to kick off. Next Sunday is the draft. So for those of you who are playing, make sure you check that, tune in. It should be a ton of fun. Carter, no spoilers. How did the AL East preview go? You got together with all the other Locked On hosts. I did this last year. It was your turn. You were up. How did it go, just in general?
Pretty interesting results. Everything will be posted March 24th on Locked On sites. If you want to see the AL East preview, that's where it will be. We had Locked On Orioles, obviously the Yankees. Pretty much every host was there in the AL, so you had your 5 hosts, obviously. So it was a good time. Interesting takes on the Toronto Blue Jays, interesting takes on some other teams in this division. It was pretty much talked as like a 4-team division. I'll handle one spoiler. Nobody thinks the Rays are going to do a whole lot this year, unfortunately. So it was kind of just the top 4. A lot of interesting takes, a lot of interesting perspectives, especially on the Toronto Blue Jays. Definitely different from what we normally talk about on the podcast. So again, was interesting to see how other teams, other rivals in the AL East do view the Toronto Blue Jays. It's kind of this all-in or all-out approach that the narrative that I kind of got from their takes and perspectives on the Toronto Blue Jays. But it's kind of funny that we had this episode scheduled for Friday because obviously the Thursday, as we're recording this, that was our AL East preview. Now we're kind of doing our own AL East preview in a sense, getting a little bit more specific, obviously, though, going into the Baltimore Orioles. We already have done a Yankees episode. That was before Garrett Cole, obviously, had to undergo Tommy John surgery. So there was a little bit of, it would be a little bit different now doing it if we knew obviously about the Garrett Cole injury, but diving into the Baltimore Orioles. This is a team that just off the forefront, I think their lineup's going to just be exponentially better than the Toronto Blue Jays. I think it's a lot more deep. You got guys like Gunnar, you got guys like Alek Rutschman, a little bit of a younger team. Everything the Toronto Blue Jays wanted to be in 2021. We'll see if the Baltimore Orioles can, have a little bit more success with their guys obviously being young right now and approaching their primes. But with the Baltimore Orioles, just kind of going over the lineup and just some major things with the Baltimore Orioles. Obviously losing Anthony Santander, going to the Toronto Blue Jays, losing Corbin Burns last season, and Gunnar Henderson having an injury as well. Not going to be anything major, but might keep him out for the first few weeks of the season. And with the Toronto Blue Jays, we get the Baltimore Orioles' first series of the year. So if Gunnar Henderson is not playing in that series, obviously would be a big benefit to the Toronto Blue Jays. But is there anything standing out to you when you compare the Toronto Blue Jays to the Baltimore Orioles?
Yeah, well, you touched on it a little bit, the depth of this lineup, right? As we go down, I mean, you got your Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, Adley Rutschman, Colton Cowser, Tyler O'Neill, Ryan O'Hearn, Ryan Mountcastle, Jackson Holiday, Cedric Mullins. Again, we'll see what happens with Jackson Holiday, a great player who's going to be fantastic, needs developmental time. I'm not sure how long that's going to take for him to get to, sort of the level of what was expected of him. But it's a very deep lineup. The only problem I have with this Baltimore Orioles squad that I would argue in comparison to the Toronto Blue Jays, when we just talk lineup, not pitching, not anything else, is the age. Honestly, it's the experience. These guys, we know that they're great players, but can they year over year continue to do this? And we've seen the Blue Jays struggle with that when their guys were a little bit younger. I mean, even up until last season, we saw this. So it's going to, I think, all really come down to which young guys can be that superstar, right? Is it going to be Vladimir Guerrero Jr.? Is it going to be Bichette? Or is it going to be Adley Rutschman or Gunnar Henderson? which of these four guys are really going to step up and make their mark on the MLB? I think that's really, when I'm debating the two just lineups, that's the big question. We've seen what Vladimir Guerrero Jr. can do. We've seen what Bichette can do in leading the league in hits. We necessarily haven't seen that to the biggest extent with Gunnar or Adley. But I think it's in the cards. They're going to be great hitters. They're going to be great players. But can they do that year after year? That's something I'm not fully convinced of quite yet.
I think when you're talking about Gunnar Henderson, I think this guy is the real deal. This guy, again, only 23 years old, but expected to have a very good season. Injury, a little bit of a setback. Adley Rutschman has a little bit more question marks coming off of a season where he was not the best offensively that you would have hoped for. Again, still as a very young player, you can hope that he can progress and have a little bit of a bounce back year in 2025. Colton Cowser, very good last season. Jordan Westberg, again, very good last season. Cedric Mullins is going to be hitting 7 through 9 in this lineup. Still a very good 7 through 9 hitter. That would be something that the Toronto Blue Jays would definitely invite to have a little bit more depth throughout this lineup. So I think if you're going to compare these guys offensively, I think you have to give the advantage to the Baltimore Orioles. When you look at the top, it's relatively similar. Like Vladdy and Gunnar Henderson, you could argue kind of flip of a coin who's going to have a better year. Vladdy contract year might lean a little bit more towards that now with Gunnar Henderson, especially having that injury. And you kind of have Bo Bichette, Adley Rutschman. I'm taking Bo Bichette offensively. Anthony Santander, you got Jordan Westberg, maybe Colton Cowser, one of those guys. Maybe it's a Ryan Mountcastle. So again, relatively close there. But as you get to Alejandro Kirks, obviously Jordan Westberg isn't going to be a guy that I'm taking most of the time, especially with how last season did go. A little bit more unproven hitters on the Toronto Blue Jays side. But when you talk about this unproven notion, you talk about age for the Baltimore Orioles, made the ALDS in 2023. Pretty sure they got bounced in the wild card last season in 2024. So not a lot of playoff experience. Toronto Blue Jays obviously do not have that much playoff experience either. Have a lot of experience losing in the wild card, but not a lot of experience making deep playoff runs. So if it comes to a playoff series, I think that would be an interesting notion that the Toronto Blue Jays have a little bit more of this veteran presence at this point than the Baltimore Orioles do, especially when we look at the pitching, especially when we're looking at the starting rotation that we'll get into. But I think overall, if you're looking at just pure talent from an offensive standpoint, I think the Orioles have a much deeper lineup and probably have a safer floor than the Toronto Blue Jays do for this upcoming season.
Yeah, and that's where I would put that, right? I think the ceiling for the Toronto Blue Jays, and I, I didn't hear what was going on in the AL East conversations with Locked On. But Carter, one thing that I would point out is that I think the Blue Jays ceiling is pretty high. I think the floor is low, but the ceiling is high. They're sort of an odd team like that, right? If everybody's firing on all cylinders when you're comparing them to the Baltimore Orioles, I think maybe the Blue Jays might have a higher ceiling. It's close, and I think you're right. I think the Baltimore Orioles are a way more stable lineup. I think you know what you're going to get, especially defensive as a defensive team. Having Adley Rutschman behind the dish defensively is a absolute, cheat code. The guy is fantastic. You want him to be, I think, better, like you said, offensively than last season, and you expect more out of him. But I think at the end of the day, they are a more stable team, and that was I think it's a little bit unfair of me to compare Adley and Gunnar to Bo and Vlad, because I think that if you look at those two guys, I think you take Vlad and Bo every day of the week over those two. And as much as I love Gunnar and Adley, I have nothing but respect for these two players because they are fantastic. They are young. They're exciting to watch. Bo and Vlad just are better. I think they're just the bigger stars right now. And I think I think when we go back and look at the Vlad contract, there's a reason that the $500-600 million conversations are in talks when you talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. And again, we'll see, eventually down the line, we'll have to see what a Gunnar Henderson contract looks like. And that should be just as interesting.
Yeah, Gunnar Henderson is definitely going to get a bag. If you're talking about the top two guys throughout each team, I didn't realize Adley Rutschman's 27 years old. I thought he was younger than that, so that is something that you can take into consideration. Vladdy, Bo, both being 26. Gunnar Henderson going into his age 24 season. So it's in those two, it's pretty interesting because Gunnar Henderson coming off a very good season, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. coming off one of his best seasons. Then you have Adley Rutschman and Bo Bichette coming off the seasons where they didn't really go up to par. But I think when you look at Bo Bichette and his upside, probably a little bit more than Adley Rutschman. But then if you want to add the defensive perception of it, Gunnar Henderson, probably a better defender than Bo Bichette is. Adley Rutschman, Vladdy, kind of hard to compare because one's a catcher, one's a first baseman. But I guess the Blue Jays bias maybe runs a little bit deep here too. Two guys in contract years. If we're talking about 2025 production, I think you do have to take the Toronto Blue Jays, but I wouldn't say you're crazy if you're going with the Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson approach. One thing I kind of wanted to do is look at this from a different perspective. It's just the offseason acquisitions between both teams as well. Just we'll start offensively because we were talking about mostly the lineup for both teams here. Tyler O'Neill, pretty much the only acquisition for the Baltimore Orioles offensively. When you look at the Toronto Blue Jays, obviously adding Andrus Gimenez, they added Anthony Santander. So right there, taking Santander from the Orioles, adding him to the Toronto Blue Jays makes the Orioles worse. We said that in the offseason, makes the Toronto Blue Jays better. And then when you go kind of to the pitching staff, they added Charlie Morton, which will be a nice signing. But Max Scherzer was pretty much our Charlie Morton. And you could say Max Scherzer probably has a little bit higher upside. Maybe Charlie Morton, a little bit more a safer choice with the injury concerns that carry with Max Scherzer. But again, Charlie Morton is also a 40-plus-year-old starting pitcher. So when you talk about offseason acquisitions, the Toronto Blue Jays definitely had a better offseason than the Baltimore Orioles. Andrew Ketteridge, another guy they did sign, obviously is on the injured list as well. So that's not going to help them too much, especially in the short term. But I think the whole narrative is going to be how much better were the Baltimore Orioles, obviously, in 2024 than the Toronto Blue Jays were in 2024? And did the Toronto Blue Jays do enough into this 2024-2025 offseason to make us be able to compete with the Baltimore Orioles down the stretch in 2025?
Yeah, and Carter, just before we sort of take a break and move over to the pitching side of everything, you got to look at what you talked about. I think the biggest swing factor right now, or one of the biggest swing factors outside of losing Corbin Burns for the Orioles, is Anthony Santander. He's a guy that hit 44 home runs last year. That is going to help any offense. And do I expect that he's going to hit 44 home runs again? No, not for the Blue Jays. Do I expect mid-30 home runs? Yeah, probably. That's a huge piece to take out of that lineup offensively, especially when you do have some younger guys in the team that you're not going to see day in, day out with the same production or close to the same production. Anthony Santander leaving the Orioles to come to the Blue Jays might just be a key factor for this team, which I said, again, every time we talk about Anthony Santander, I'm going to throw this in. I said early on, I think that this was going to be a change for this Toronto Blue Jays team that was going to majorly help them. If you can take a piece from a division rival and then use that piece to then hopefully win you more games within the division, that is massive. And the more that you're going to play the Orioles and the Yankees and these guys, that's where the majority of your games are played for the most part. So if you can take advantage of beating the teams within your own division, that's going to be huge for this Blue Jays team this season in 2025.
I think the biggest difference for me when looking at the offensive production from the Baltimore Orioles compared to the Toronto Blue Jays, I think it's a lot easier to get excited about a lot of the players on the Baltimore Orioles compared to the Toronto Blue Jays. Just going down the list, like Gunnar Henderson, obviously a guy you're going to be excited to watch in the box. Adley Rutschman, you got to hope it can get better. Cedric Mullins going to be another guy that you've seen how good he has been in the past. Hope that you can get to that point. Jordan Westburg being a young guy, you hope that the best seasons are ahead of him. He's going to continue to get better. Colton Cowser has that same notion. Tyler O'Neill is hitting 6 for RotoTrump. Their projected lineup. I think Tyler O'Neill might hit 5 for the Toronto Blue Jays. Maybe, again, you have George Springer leading off. Tyler O'Neill probably going to be a better hitter than George Springer in 2025. And you just have Ryan O'Hearn, Ryan Mountcastle. Like, they're probably hitting 5 in this Toronto Blue Jays lineup. They have Jackson Holliday, one of the best prospects in all of baseball. When you look at it from the other side for the Toronto Blue Jays standpoint, as excited as you can get for Will Wagner, he has never been this top prospect, the Joey Loperfidos. Again, Ernie Clement can have a successful season, but is he going to go out and, have this 120 weighted runs created plus? Probably not. You pretty much have limited upside with a guy like Ernie Clement. Maybe you can get excited for guys like Daulton Varsho, Alejandro Kirk, but they're really kind of serving on this note on the side of they need to get better. They're coming off seasons where they haven't necessarily been up to par hitting wise, whereas like your Jordan Westbergs, your Colton Cowsers, your Cedric Mullins have had more success recently than a lot of these other guys. So when you look at the top end talent for each team, I think you can compare those, and those are more debatable. But as you get, again, throughout the 6, the 7, the 8 hitters, this clearly goes to the Baltimore Orioles.
Yeah, I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate to you just before we take the break. I also don't think it's easy to compare the rest of this lineup because I think this Baltimore Orioles lineup is based around the long ball a little bit. Guys being able to hit for power, hit those extra base hits, right? When you look at the Toronto Blue Jays, I feel like besides the 3 guys in Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and Anthony Santander, really it is going to be a lot of base-to-base baseball, right? Your Ernie Clements, your Alejandro Kirks, Daulton Varsho, he'll send a few this year. But I think the rest, even Will Wagner, you're looking at a lot of guys that are maybe great at getting on base, getting those signals, but are they going to be the guys that are going to hit a ton of home runs or hit a ton of extra base hits? Probably not. So I guess it really depends. If this entire Blue Jays lineup can come together, that can be useful, but that's banking on your entire lineup instead of maybe 3 or 4 guys a night. So that is a reason, I guess, why the Orioles might be looked at a little bit stronger here, is because any of these guys can change a baseball game for them. Whereas the Toronto Blue Jays, if it's not your top 3 hitters doing it, you really need a lot of things to go well in one night. And so, yeah, you're right. Maybe in that scenario, you have to give just the ability for the long ball, I think, is a massive key for this Baltimore Orioles team.
It's also going to be a lot easier to pick a team like the Baltimore Orioles coming off of a 90-plus win season, the year before having 101 wins, where you have the Toronto Blue Jays sneaking into a wild card spot, then last year having 74 wins. So I think early on, especially when you're looking at which team fan base, whether it's the Toronto Blue Jays, whether it's the Baltimore Orioles, whether it's just MLB fans, are going to pick towards, if they're saying who's going to win the AL East, who's just going to be a better team in baseball. I think a lot of people are easily going to pick the Baltimore Orioles, but we're going to have to see how it does pan out. Obviously, as Toronto Blue Jays fans, we are optimistic about the Toronto Blue Jays, and I think, like what I've said, that I think the lineup for the Baltimore Orioles is definitely better than the Blue Jays, but I think things do change when you start talking about starting pitching, talk about the depth the Orioles have, and then just obviously the veteran presence that the Blue Jays have as well. So we're going to go more into the bullpen, more into the starting pitching, kind of compare these two and see which team does have the early onset advantage going into 2025. And we're going to get into all that coming up.
Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I'm going to tell you guys this right now. My brother called me earlier today saying, hey, how do I get in? How do I sign up for FanDuel? What's the code I can use? And like I said, just sign up and you will get the bonus bet, the $200 in bonus bets. Make sure you pick a lock for that $5 bet so that you can really get those bonus bets. And he was so pumped up. He was getting on the phone he was signing up as we were on the phone. So make sure you guys go and do that as well. Visit FanDuel.com and get in on all the college hoops action all tournament long. So, Carter, we've talked about the starting lineups. Now let's get into the pitching staff for the Baltimore Orioles versus the Toronto Blue Jays. Obviously, a huge loss for the Baltimore Orioles in talks of Corbin Burns. I mean, that is going to hurt any team, no matter who it is, and especially for the Orioles. So now the Baltimore Orioles pitching staff is Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Charlie Morton, Dean Kramer, and Tomoyuki
Sugano.
Thanks.
Tomoyuki Sugano. And that's also Grayson Rodriguez right now injured as well. So they might be Cade Povich, Albert Suarez as their 5th rotation guy. When you're comparing rotations, you look at the top of the Toronto Blue Jays, you got Kevin Gausman, Jose Berrios, Chris Bassitt, obviously, Matt Scherzer, Bowden Francis. You look at this Baltimore Orioles rotation, Zach Eflin could have a good year. I love Grayson Rodriguez, but this guy just cannot stay healthy. When you get to Sugano, this guy coming from, I think it was the Japanese league, a 35-year-old, a little bit lower in velocities, but does have a pretty good ERA. But again, 35 years old, not really bringing the velocity. How's that going to translate to the MLB? That will be a question that will have to be discovered. Dean Kramer has had some good years, but as a middle rotation guy, as their number 3 guy right now, don't love that going into the year. Charlie Morton, again, the 40-year-old that we were talking about, he'll probably be a low 4s ERA, but again, if he's the second guy that they're going to be rolling out against the Toronto Blue Jays opening day series, I don't think that's something you're going to love as a Baltimore Orioles fan. I think this is going to be their demise if the Baltimore Orioles do have a demise in 2025. It is going to be that starting pitching. You lose Corbin Burns. You have some other injuries throughout your organization with a bunch of Tommy Johns throughout last season. There's not a lot of depth when it comes to this starting rotation. The bullpen is pretty good, I will say, but they might have trouble early on with a lot of these starters.
You know what, Carter? The more and more we do these team-by-team breakdowns, I realize what a good position the Toronto Blue Jays are in this year. And maybe this is the Blue Jays bias, but you look at the injuries with the Yankees. You look at the pitching staff of this Baltimore Orioles team, which is pretty terrible, to be honest with you. Grayson Rodriguez, 100% agree with you. I think he's excellent. But you gotta be able to play and you gotta be able to stay on the field to make an impact. So what will his impact be? I'm a little bit not sure. And we talk about how huge pitching is and how far pitching can take you. I just don't know. Like if you're facing any of these guys against, Kevin Gausman or Jose Berrios or Chris Bassitt, I don't know. I almost take all three of those guys over anybody that's healthy. Zach Eflin is going to be good, but if that's all you got, I don't know. I'm a little bit. It really shifts my thinking when you really do a deep dive into these teams and what they still have and the injuries that come along with it. I'm liking the Blue Jays' chances more and more as we continue through this spring training, Carter.
Yeah, for me with Zach Eflin, I think he's going to be slightly better than Chris Bassitt. I think it'll be still
Yeah.
comparable, but I think it'll be slightly for Chris Bassitt. I'm taking Jose Berrios. I'm taking Kevin Gausman over Zach Eflin. Again, Grayson Rodriguez there is a little bit different. But when you're talking about just even the depth, like Max Scherzer absolutely clears Sugano for me. Again, don't really know a ton about him right now. But again, like I said, 35-year-old that doesn't have a lot of high velocities, does have pretty good underlying numbers, but it's going to be interesting to see how that translates to the MLB. We'll kind of be able to tell what kind of pitcher Sugano is going to be in the first few weeks. Cade Povich, 24-year-old, I just, again, unproven. So a lot of risk being carried over into the season where the Baltimore Orioles are being considered a division favorite in the AL East, obviously with all those New York Yankees injuries as well. Baltimore Orioles had a few injuries on their own, which we'll kind of get into as we go into the bullpen, obviously talk about the starting rotation as well. The main narrative right now is that earlier on going into the offseason, it was like, okay, it's probably the Baltimore Orioles, it's probably the New York Yankees. Now it's the Yankees could be there, the Orioles could be there, the Boston Red Sox are picking up steam, obviously with the moves they've made. The Toronto Blue Jays, a little bit of a dark horse team. The Rays I'll even throw in there. Again, with Shane McClanahan coming back, Drew Rasmussen, they're going to be better than they were last season. Always a team that's slept on, always overachieve. That's mostly saying that everyone thinks the Rays are going to suck and they end up not being that bad. But I think they're going to be serviceable. I really don't think there's a team in the AL that's going to be just ran through. It's going to be like kind of like just walking all over. There's not going to be a Chicago White Sox in the AL East.
No.
There's not going to be a Washington Nationals, whatever it is, the Miami Marlins. There's not going to be no team that's horrendous in the AL East in 2025. But that division title is a whole lot more wide open now than it was even 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, totally. No, and you know what? I have a very hot take, but I will save that for the episode coming up with Skylar Peters and Dallin Wilton. Monday, I believe it will be the 23rd or 24th, Carter. It's the Monday, Tuesday of the week of opening day. And those should be really interesting because you guys will get to see, hey, if I love betting on baseball, we're gonna give you guys some bets. We're gonna give you some bold predictions. We're going to give you our full sort of 2025 outlook on how this team is realistically going to do. And we'll get into all that. But I want to throw out there that one take I don't want to say, but I really, really have been struggling to keep it in because I think it's going to get some people fired up. But I will keep that in my holster for now. Carter, when you look, I guess, as an entirety, where do you see, and I know you sort of answered this with the fact that they could all be fighting for the title. Where do you realistically see this Baltimore Orioles team finishing the year? If you had to put a prediction right now.
See, I'll say the win total that I did have might give away a little bit with how good I think the Baltimore Orioles are going to be. I had them at 93 wins. I still think this is going to be a very good baseball team. I think the lineup is going to help them out a ton. The pitching just has to be serviceable. You can get innings from Grayson Rodriguez, and maybe you get a step from Cade Povich. Someone's going to have to step up in this starting rotation. Kind of the same idea, where someone in the middle of the lineup for the Toronto Blue Jays is going to need to step up if you're going to be a successful team if you're the Baltimore Orioles. And that's the biggest thing when we talk about all these divisional opponents, that a lot of these teams do have their shortcomings now. Look at the Yankees. Their starting pitching has suffered immensely with Luis Gil, Garrett Cole going down. Obviously, that lineup, if Aaron Judge gets injured, again, don't want to prey on that, but that lineup could be very volatile if there is a few injuries there as well. You can say that for any team, really, though. Baltimore Orioles starting pitching, not very good. The Boston Red Sox, they're the most complete team, I would say. But again, a lot of things are going to have to go right for them. They're going to need good seasons from Garrett Crochet, Tanner Houck, Brian Bayo as we go down the list. Walker Buehler going to hopefully have a bounce back. But every team, for the most part, in this AL East does have their shortcomings. And if things don't go well with that one, whether it's a starting rotation, whether it's a bullpen, whether it's just a few players not playing up to par, that's where this division does open up. There's a reason the Toronto Blue Jays can win the AL East. A lot of things have to go well, obviously, but there's a way the Yankees can win the AL East. There's a way the Red Sox, the Orioles, every team, other than I'm going to say the Rays, I don't think the Rays really have a chance to win it. But I think a lot of teams, if things do go according to plan, there is a path for them to win that AL East. But I do want to kind of go into the Baltimore Orioles bullpen, compare it to the Toronto Blue Jays real quick. Felix Bautista, closing pitcher, going to be back after coming off of Tommy John surgery in 2024. Still a little bit of a question mark if he will be ready for opening day. They are leaning towards him being ready for opening day, so that will be something the Toronto Blue Jays probably have to deal with. Obviously, Felix Bautista, very good closing pitcher. Comparing him to Jeff Hoffman, a little bit of a tough thing to do with Felix Bautista being out in 2024. I think it's relatively similar, though. With Andrew Ketteridge going down, that's a huge blow to this Baltimore Orioles bullpen, especially in higher leverage situations. So now they're going to be relying on guys like Sir Anthony Dominguez, Keegan Aiken, and Yanier Cano. These guys, again, comparable to the Toronto Blue Jays guys. I'm not very high on Chad Green. I have a lot of these guys being higher than Chad Green. Erik Swanson being out now for the Toronto Blue Jays. I think Andrew Ketteridge probably going to have a better year than Erik Swanson, but still a pretty big injury for both sides. I think as you go down the list again, you got the Gregory Sotos, you got your Albert Suarez, who may start in the starting rotation, especially with all the injuries the Baltimore Orioles have been having. But I think if you just look at it from the depth that they do have for the Baltimore Orioles, I think bullpen-wise, I got to give them the slight edge here as well.
Yeah, it's pretty close for me, and you're right. With some guys being injured, and injuries are going to happen. I mean, even a couple of guys slept on, like Gregory Soto, Albert Suarez as well. Some of these guys that are known to be able to do certain things, be stable enough, and yeah, I think their depth is a little bit heavier than the Toronto Blue Jays. So I think that you're right. I think it's going to be a battle. This is going to be a crazy season because I don't necessarily know if I'm a betting man, I don't know where I'm pushing all my chips to this year. If I'm a person that just wants to see the AL East battle, this might be a great year for it. These teams are going to clash a lot of the time. It's going to be head-to-head matchups. Who's going to win which? I think you're looking at a lot of coin flips this year, Carter, and it just depends on which area of each game decides to show up that day. Again, we need a big year from our bullpen with the Toronto Blue Jays. And probably the Baltimore Orioles are looking at their starting rotation and being like, wow, we need some of these guys to really lock it in. So there are areas for each team that need to be better, and there are areas of each team that are really fantastic. Should be a really, really fun year. And I think before this offseason, Carter, people were looking at this Toronto Blue Jays team and really putting them out. But I think it really is a four-horse race right now, which is crazy to say with 5 teams being only in the AL East. So it's going to be an exciting year. I feel like it's going to be one of those years that it's game 161, 162, and we're still not sure who's going to finish in that wild card. It might come down to that last game. That's sort of what I'm thinking how this year is going to go. I'm really excited. It should be a lot of fun.
See, I'm with this 4-man race for the playoffs. I don't necessarily think that for the AL East quite yet. I think it's like a 3.5. I think you got your 3 teams.
I'm just saying for the wild card.
Oh, for the wild card?
Yeah. Like if like I don't know, anybody could be anywhere. Will it come down to right to the end? That's sort of more so what I mean.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think there's really 3 teams that can win the AL East. Toronto Blue Jays dark horse. That's why I have it like as a 3.5. But for the playoffs, for sure, I think there's 4 teams that do have a good chance of making the playoffs. There is something that I do want to go into, but I'm going to save that for the third segment. So we're going to take a short break. We got some spring training stuff, and I just want to finish my thoughts on the Toronto Blue Jays and the AL East coming up. Today's episode is sponsored by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes into your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete finance command center. You can track all your accounts of investments and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. I know, especially when I'm going out with the boys, if we're having a couple drinks or just even going out in general, it is very easy to lose track of how much money you are spending. Things are getting more and more expensive now, especially if you're online shopping. One item turns into 4, and then you're wondering, where did all my money go that I was budgeting for my rent, for my car payments, you name it. With Monarch Money, helps you keep everything organized and helps you keep track of your spending so you're not overspending in any area. So you can take control of your finances with Monarch Money today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Here, I'm
Sorry,
just going to
Carter.
pick it up
Yeah.
from where we were in the second segment, just continuing on. One thing the Toronto Blue Jays did not do very well in 2024, one among a lot of things that didn't go well in 2024, is they were not good against the AL East. They were not good against the New
No.
York Yankees. They were losing games to the Baltimore Orioles. They were losing games to the Boston Red Sox. They were not good in their own division. And we say it's kind of this 4-horse race for the playoffs. There's 4 teams, maybe even, we'll just throw the Rays in there for fun. There's 5 teams that could make the playoffs in this AL East division. Where are those games going to kind of mean the most? Where are teams going to take games on their opponents and where they're going to lose games on their opponents? It's going to be in division. It's going to be those head-to-head matchups. The Toronto Blue Jays are going to need to win way more of those games than they did last season. I want to get the exact AL East record that they were in. I don't have that offhand. I'll get that when I throw it back over to you. But last year, just from the eye test, just from remembering what happened last year, not a lot of things went well, and it all started within the division.
No, that's something we talked about heavily last year, is not being able to beat those teams in the division. And if you want to make the playoffs, that's something you have to do. Obviously, you're going to play teams in your own division more than you play any other team. So you're going to have to show up when the lights get bright and you're facing these guys time after time after time again, and they're seeing what pitchers are doing, what tendencies the batters are giving. And that's something the Blue Jays just did not fix last year. It was an all-around bad year for this Toronto Blue Jays team. And as we move forward through 2025, you're 100% right, Carter. That is something they have to do way better on, picking up certain pitches that they can dominate the Yanks pitchers on, or the Orioles pitching, whatever it may be, different weak spots within their game. When you're talking about the batters, look at the film, look at what are guys not doing well within the division. That is something this team really needs to clue in on for this season to help them move forward and hopefully claim a wild card or playoff berth.
Yeah, the Toronto Blue Jays 21-31 against AL East opponents last season, 10 games below 500. For a division that's supposed to be relatively tight, Toronto Blue Jays have the worst win total at 78.5. I think the Yankees have it at 87 or 88.5. So every team is within around 10 games. And for a division that's supposed to kind of come down to the wire, these divisional matchups are going to be in the spotlight. That's just where playoff teams are going to be made, and those crazy crumbling to the end of the season, the 2021 vibes where you're excited about the team not making the playoffs, that one game can mean the difference. So we're going to see it early on against the Baltimore Orioles, obviously opening day series. We're going to see it throughout the year, how they play the New York Yankees, how they play the Boston Red Sox, how they play the Tampa Bay Rays. These games are going to be the difference in an AL East that should be pretty tight going down the stretch. But I did kind of want to compare this back to spring training. I wanted to go over who has been hot, just some of the storylines we have seen from spring training. And one that has been picking up a little bit of steam is Daulton Varsho. Just continues to hit the long ball, continues to make great contact at the plate. I'll throw this to you. Just again, don't go too far into depth as we are getting close to the end of the episode. But Daulton Varsho and the DH position early on, if that shoulder is not ready for opening day, I'm starting to pick up this traction. Is Daulton Varsho how well he's hitting in spring training? If he is going to hit this well into the regular season, would you be comfortable throwing Daulton Varsho in that DH position exclusively for the first couple of weeks?
Carter, I'm going to go back to something that we said so many times last year. Ride the hot hand. If Daulton Varsho is showing you that he can hit this baseball, as much as we want him defensively, you got to be able to score runs. And if Daulton Varsho can bring run scoring and the long ball to his game this year in a very big manner, you need him in the lineup. And if that's at the DH spot, I am more than thrilled to say, here you go. Take as much time as you need to get back into defensive form. But we want your bat. I think that'd be a great move for this management team to show Daulton Varsho that they still have faith not only in him defensively, but also as a hitter. And as a hitter that can be a very heavy contributor into this lineup.
Yeah, clearly it's not looking like that shoulder injury is compromising anything at the plate. He has been absolutely on fire. That was my biggest, what if for Daulton Varsho going into this season, is if he was going to miss all this spring training, which he's been clearly ahead of schedule on, how was that going to impact his offensive output for this middle of the order storyline that we've been talking about, especially over the last few episodes, that someone is going to need to step up. Maybe it will be that Daulton Varsho finally, after 2 years removed from that trade deadline deal, haven't necessarily got the offense in 2022. Maybe this could be that breakout year that we see Daulton Varsho kind of come into his own offensively for the Toronto Blue Jays. Other than that, there's not too much I want to go into. The Toronto Blue Jays just continue to win in spring training, which has been nice to see. There is one thing that I wanted to kind of bring up just to end this episode, and it has to do with how the Toronto Blue Jays spring training compares to how they do in the regular season. This is a tweet from Avery Chenier. So he said, what if the spring training results mattered for our Toronto Blue Jays? So in 2021 in spring training, Blue Jays were 16-9. That was a pretty fun year, and the Toronto Blue Jays were a good team in spring training. Didn't make the playoffs, but very fun year offensively. 2022, they were 9-6. Pretty good year as well. Make the wildcard series. Not going to say how that ended up because that did not end very fun in that year. 2023, they were 17-15, above 500. They made the playoffs again, playing the Twins. Not a very good year. 2024, they were 13-17. They were last place in the division. They were not a good team in the AL. So maybe this early hot start in spring training, I think the Blue Jays might be 13-6 now. It's 12-6, one of the two. Don't really care too much because it is spring training, but we have seen, and we're going to start this a little bit of a spin zone here, that if the Toronto Blue Jays have a good spring training, they are going to carry that over into the regular season.
Yeah, they're 12-6 right now in spring training, Carter. And you know what? It's something we always talk about, getting off to a good start in spring training, getting that full wind up in and working certain kinks out. And that's what the Toronto Blue Jays have been able to do so far. Will it translate? We'll have to wait and see. Everybody, please have a great and safe weekend. Me and Carter are off to play in our hockey beer league playoffs, big St. Patrick's Day social. It should be a absolute blast of a weekend, but we can't wait to be back with you guys here on Monday. Getting closer and closer, inching closer and closer to obviously opening day. So again, guys, hit that subscribe button if you're still here and still watching. We always appreciate all of you tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys on Monday.